Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. As I promised, I'm going to create more AlphaZero content for you. Today is a new lesson about how to attack like AlphaZero. Hopefully it will improve your chess while you are having a good time. Today's topic, a damaged Kingside. But will it be for the opponent or for AlphaZero? That we shall see very soon. AlphaZero playing with the black pieces this time, and the game began with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, the Italian or Gioco piano, and after d3, AlphaZero goes a6. This is when you shall ask what the fudge, chocolate fudge. This position is very well known, of course, but remember, AlphaZero doesn't have any opening database input. It has played games against itself, that's how it learned to play chess, that's how it has improved its chess, but it has no database. a6, that's an almost novelty. Only beginners played a6 according to what I see in my database. Everybody would normally develop the knight, that's the standard move in this position, you must know it for sure. And after knight g5, if white wants to play knight g5 to attack this f7 pawn, black can simply castle kingside, so there's no attack or whatsoever. Now the problem with a6 is that it doesn't do anything about knight g5. The move d3 is preparing the knight jump. You see the bishop is already attacking the f7 pawn, and now the knight can come to g5 next move. a6 doesn't do anything about it, allows knight g5, so Stockfish does go knight g5, questioning the plan of black. But AlphaZero says, hey, I'm okay playing knight to h6, which is the only move with which you can defend the f7 pawn. But have we learned about knight on the rim being dim? Yes, we have. Maybe not in the AlphaZero videos, but I have mentioned it multiple times, and you definitely have heard this before. This is not an ideal place for the knight. It has less squares to jump to, and in general, it's just way less active than as if it was on f6 or somewhere closer to the center of the board. So why is AlphaZero doing all this? Let's hope we will understand it soon. Castle kingside, d6, opening up the diagonal of the bishop, and after a4 it goes bishop to g4, attacking the queen. So far everything seems normal except for the knight being not on f6 but on h6. And castle kingside. The second what the fudge moment. This knight can be captured, and if white takes on h6, that destroys the pawn chain of black. Black has just castled kingside. It kind of feels like stepping into the attack of white, since this pawn chain is really vulnerable, making the king exposed. So why would you want to castle on the flank where your king is super weak? And your pawns are also weak, of course, but the main focus is on the boss, this king on g8, which would need shelter, but it doesn't really have shelter. Well, we're gonna learn today that patterns help a lot in chess, and normally you would not want to have doubled pawns in front of your king, especially not these type of doubled pawns. But there are exceptions, and AlphaZero will teach us what are the advantages of this pawn structure here in this middle game, even if we all think it's just bad, purely bad. So castle kingside, allowing bishop takes h6, but Stockfish does not take on h6. It plays h3, attacking the bishop moves to h5, and one more time, white could take on h6, it doesn't. But don't worry, we will soon see a very similar position. First, Stockfish plays c3. That's a very logical move, preparing d4 in the future, or b4 expanding on the queen side. AlphaZero decides that it doesn't care about pawn pushes on the queen side, and also it is not worried at all about this capture. Finally, Stockfish takes on h6. So we're gonna see something very similar that could have been if Stockfish had taken on h6 earlier. As mentioned, it was possible already after castle kingside, but the position that arises now after king h8, bishop takes, g takes is actually very similar. So here are the pros and cons of double pawns in front of your king. I'm not gonna tell you. You thought I was gonna help you? No way. This is the first moment I'll ask you to pause the video and try to come up with the pros and cons of this pawn structure on the king side. I'm pretty sure you can tell me what's wrong about it, but let's try to focus on the positive. Be optimistic. What is it that black has gained with this capture on h6? Pause the video for a moment and now let's discuss. Doubling pawns means in this case that, yeah, we have 3 isolated pawns on the king side. That's bad. All those pawns are vulnerable. They cannot defend each other. So that's on the negative side. Also, it's weakening the king. You see that there's no pawn on the g file. If white could open up the position, for instance, the long diagonal, the black king would struggle. What are the pros? Because we have only talked about the negative part of this position. I have managed to take the arrows down. Some of the positive here in this position could be there's a semi-open g file. And hey, even though the white king has a perfect pawn chain in front of it, the bodyguards are there, nothing is wrong with the white king, but thanks to a semi-open file, we could start attacking the white king. And if we manage to open up the position even more with a move like f5, then we have quite a promising attack thanks to this pin, the f file opening up, the queen coming in the game as well. So there's some potential on the king side, and that potential is what AlphaZero is playing for, a king side attack. Yes, the kings have castled on the same flank, so it's not so usual to see this type of attack with destroying your own pawn chain, but AlphaZero does not mind doubling pawns. It will start attacking the white king. So we're gonna see one more time how to attack a castled king, but here it's about doubling pawns, and I'm coloring all sorts of squares. Now we've got this right. Knight bd2, white is playing the most natural moves. Honestly, if I had to pick sides, I would take white here. Everything is harmonious, natural, beautiful. White for black, we shall see how it proves that it has enough compensation for the strategic weaknesses in its position. Bishop to a7, that's a prophylactic move. As said, after c3, b4 could come in the future, or d4 after some preparatory moves. So bishop a7 in general steps out of that. Bishop to d5, white is improving the bishop, and now here comes the third fudge moment of the game. Knight to e7. We can see the threat. Black wants to take the bishop, but by jumping away from c6, it allows bishop takes b7. That's a free pawn. I like free stuff a lot. I love free stuff, to be honest. But it's not just a free pawn. It's more than a free pawn. After bishop takes b7, the rook is hanging and the pawn is hanging. The rook has to go. And now white takes a second pawn. It's 2 pawns up for white. Perfect pawn chain. What is going on with AlphaZero? It seems like it cannot play chess with the black pieces. We have seen lots of beautiful games by AlphaZero with the white pieces. And this looks like it's out of control. Coffee house chess. What do you think? Will it succeed? It's all in, and all that black has is the hope of grabbing the initiative on the king side and attacking the white king. So of course it goes f5, wants to open the f5. Now white goes king h1, stepping out of the semi-open g file. It's not really scared of this capture, because that would only be a trade. This pin isn't that dangerous in itself. White can take back with a pawn, and this knight is defending the f3 knight, so there's nothing concrete going on here. Therefore, after king h1, black goes knight to g6. The knight is heading toward the f4 square, which is a cool square. It's a really nice square for your pieces. Whether you have weakened your own king or not, whether you have castled the same flanks or opposite sides, having a knight on f4 or f5 if you are playing with the white pieces is a very useful attacking piece. It's actually a monster. Why is it a monster if it gets to f4? We shall soon see, because white has taken on f5 and AlphaZero does not care about that pawn. It's not even wasting time on capturing on f5. It goes knight f4. Currently, black is 3 pawns down. 3 pawns. Yes, the knight has gotten to f4, but is it enough to compensate for 3 pawns? 3 pawns, that means a full piece in value. Oh well. So why is a knight on f4 a monster, or with reversed colors on f5? Imagine that scenario. It's a monster because it's attacking important squares around the opponent's king. Yeah, maybe d3 too in this position, but normally we focus on the king side, the knight on f4 attacking the g2 pawn and also the h3 squares. Now here, the problem for white is that it's not easy to chase away this knight, because if you push g3, the h3 pawn drops. Yeah, it's only one pawn and we were 3 pawns down, but we are focusing on the king. If the h pawn disappears, there's more attack for black once the queen gets to the h file, for instance. Can we do that? I'm cheating now, we cannot go to g5, but imagine the queen got to the h file. So this cannot happen. After knight f4, white plays d4, trying to open up the center and expose the black king, because remember, there's no g pawn, and if it manages to open the long diagonal, then the king, the black king, will be in trouble. So very logical move, d4. But for a moment I want to show you what happens if Stockfish is greedy and wants to hold on to the 3 pawns up it has gathered so far. The only move that could do that is not d4 but g4, attacking the bishop, defending the f5 pawn. Now if black goes back to f7, white will be happy, 3 pawns up, and hasn't got mated. The h3 pawn is hanging, but that's not that terrible in itself. The cool thing about this position is that black doesn't have to move the bishop. After g4, the strongest move in my opinion, after some analysis with Stockfish, is knight takes h3, a piece sacrifice. So from having 2 pawns down, this is 3. 1, 2, 3. Good job, Anna. So from having 3 pawns down, black goes to capture a pawn, giving up a piece. Now, can we do the count? It's a piece and 2 pawns down. Yeah, you can take the f5 pawn, but good job. You are still a piece and a pawn down. I mean, even the pawn doesn't matter that much. A piece down normally would mean that you are losing the game. What is it that black has for the sacrificed piece? Well, the really vulnerable and exposed white king. There's no g pawn. That pawn disappeared because of g4 and capturing on h5. And this h5 pawn is about to be captured too. If the pawn on h5 is gone, then we have the h file to attack, the g file to attack, the knight on h3 is active. This bishop from a7, even though it's hidden, that's attacking the f2 pawn, which is important. It can be important. The queen can join the attack soon, and the other rook too. So basically, even though black is a piece down, this is a very promising position. I want to show you an example. There's no clear-cut win here. It may not even be winning, but the funny thing about this position is that I tried to have a look at a couple of alternatives here for white. What happens if, what happens then? d4, for instance, rook takes b2. The more I looked at this position with Stockfish 8, I'm using Stockfish 8 so that we can learn the same kind of thinking as it was during the match against AlphaZero. Yes, I know that there's Stockfish 9 and 10 out, but back then it was Stockfish 8. So this position for Stockfish 8, first, it kind of likes the position because it's a piece up after all, but then it slowly starts dropping in the evaluation and ends up saying that this position, even though white is a full piece up, is not much of an advantage, if any. So it gives almost full compensation to black for having a piece down, and white can get into deep trouble very quickly. So it's not just about equal, but a line like this, for instance, with capture on d4 and queen a8, what a beautiful move, bringing the queen to the long diagonal, creating a mortal pin on the long diagonal. This would be, for instance, game over. Now, this was just an example on how easily things can go wrong for white if white is greedy and wants to defend the pawn on f5. But you can analyze this position further. Feel free to do that at home as a practice position. So after knight f4, d4 is logical. Rook takes f5, finally, not because it wants the pawn that badly, but rook takes f5 means that now we have the f file for the rook, and also this rook could come to the attack on the h file, a rook lift on the 5th rank. 2 pawns down, we're good. Queen c2, and the rook comes back to f8. Why not queen to f6? It's a question to you. You may want to pause the video or think real quick, because I'm gonna tell you in 3 seconds what's wrong with queen to f6. It's a blunder because of g4. The rook is trapped, and yes, it's a fork too, so double trouble. The thing is, even if you take on g4 after h takes g4, the rook is still trapped. No squares for the rook. We are losing way too many pieces, too much material, even for AlphaZero. Let's not do this. After queen c2, rook f8. Sometimes you gotta go for the retreating moves. The rook is still active. That's the cool thing about long-range pieces. The rook on f8 is basically as active as it was on f5. Or who knows, maybe even more active, because you can go to the g file from f5. You couldn't go to g5 because there's this knight attacking the g5 square. So retreating moves, especially with long-range pieces, can be really useful. Remember from the previous AlphaZero videos, the bishop retreating moves? The bishops are also long-range pieces, and you normally don't see them on the back rank, but AlphaZero is actually really cool about those bishop moves. So do check those videos out if you haven't seen the bishop moves I'm referring to. But here, the rook is just as cool on f8 as it was on f5, so it's alright to go backwards sometimes. Rook a e1 and queen to f6, activating the queen, connecting the rooks, and after rook e3, queen to g7, threatening mate in 1. I'm not sure that AlphaZero actually thought that Stockfish would blunder, but it's a strong move. Even if your opponent does not blunder, it's a strong move. And here comes knight d5, attacking the rook. Now, if white goes rook e to e1 to move the hanging piece away, a line could be e takes d4, knight takes d4. This is just to illustrate the dangers in this position. After multiple trades on d4, knight to b4, this is a double attack. White has to play queen to c4 so that it defends the bishop. But now after d5, the only square for the queen that still holds on to the bishop is queen to f1. That's pretty sad, right? Oh well, and after queen takes d4, it's all collapsing, the knight is hanging, rook takes f2 is a threat, the queen is basically trapped. This is big trouble. Knight b3 to attack the queen, not allow rook takes f2 just yet. The queen would simply move away, attack the bishop, and if you move with the bishop, rook takes f2, and the queen is gone. Look at this final position of this variation. Isn't it pretty? You've got the king, the rooks, and the queen all on the back rank, hanging out together, trapping the queen. No squares for the queen. This is a terrible position. May not be completely lost, but very close to that. You can give up the queen for a rook and the bishop, so bishop takes h5 to give up the queen for a piece and the rook, but still, you don't really want to play this position, do you? You can analyze it if you want to, but we are going to focus on the actual game, because after knight d5, Stockfish decided, I'm gonna give you the rook. I don't need it. It plays bishop to b5. What do you think? Did AlphaZero take the hanging rook? Considering previous videos, if you have seen my previous videos, and how AlphaZero plays, how it thinks about the value of the pieces, does it consider that the knight is less valuable than the rook? Do you think AlphaZero took on e3? This is a tricky question. It did not. Of course, it played bishop to g6, attacking the queen, but after queen c1, do you think that AlphaZero took on e3? It's now or never. The rook may go away next move. Well, I have tricked you. Normally we would say no. AlphaZero doesn't care about material. It was totally fine about having 3 pawns down, a piece down. In all the games we have seen, basically AlphaZero is material down and never takes a hanging piece unless it's winning on the spot. But here, in this game, knight takes c3 was played. Whew! Finally AlphaZero is as greedy as I am. It likes free stuffs. Not really. It still prefers active pieces to grabbing material, but here, there's an explanation to knight takes e3. That rook on e3 is one of the best defenders of white. It's defending the third rank and the e file. Actually, without that rook, white's position is way more vulnerable. The f3 knight, defended by the d2 knight for now. But the e3 pawn itself, the g3 square, the f file, since it's only black that can grab the f file by having an extra rook that can be used to double heavy pieces on the f file. So yes, it takes on e3 because of eliminating a very important defender, and because it wants to use the square that used to be where the knight was, it needs to free that square for another piece. What do you think? Which piece is going to head toward the d5 square? You have about 3 seconds to think. It is the bishop. What a pretty bishop maneuver. You may think, yeah, the bishop is cool on g6. Why do we need to maneuver it somewhere else? Yes, it's cool on g6, but it's even cooler on d5. So let's go. Take some effort. It's 2 moves, a few tempi, but it's worth it because the bishop will be a real beast on d5, on the long diagonal, attacking the king, putting pressure on the f3 knight, and also taking squares away on the queen side. So that's a beautiful spot for the bishop in the center, bishop to d5. Bishop c4, question to you. Shall we trade bishops or shall we keep the bishop on the board? Would you take on c4? Would you move your bishop away? And if so, to where? Because there aren't so many options. You can also take on f3 if you like. So trade somewhere for the knight, for the bishop, or keep the bishop. Those are your 3 options. And now we shall discuss that AlphaZero, of course, doesn't take. It wants to keep the pair of bishops. You see, we've got the pair of bishops. They are hidden, but it's a pair of bishops. Exchange up for black, by the way, we haven't discussed earlier, but it's not material advantage. Because if you look at the number of pawns, black has 5 pawns and white has got how many? 7. That is, white has a minor piece, a knight, and 2 pawns for the rook. Counting that, 3 plus 2 is 5. A rook is worth 5 pawns or 5 points. That is the exact same material if we value them the human way. What do you think? Does AlphaZero care about this at all? That this is material equality when it was 3 pawns down before? It's a tendency. It's improving the position, right? It was 3 pawns down and now it's just equality in terms of material. If it cared, it doesn't even know how many points or pawns is what piece. It only cares about activity, and after a5, that activity means for AlphaZero e4, pushing that pawn, chasing away the knight from f3, but it does have its drawbacks. So this, I believe, in this game is one of the really tough decisions that AlphaZero had to take. Yes, you are gaining space in the center. Yes, you are chasing away the f3 knight, but at the same time, you are blocking the long diagonal. That bishop had a beautiful diagonal earlier. After e4, it's a dead piece. It's a dead piece in the corner. Will it ever get to be active again? That's a question for the future. The knight has to go, and now queen g5 improving, the queen attacking the e3 pawn. Stockfish gives up the e3 pawn. The only way to protect both the e3 pawn and the a5 pawn, both are hanging, would have been knight to b3. Probably it didn't like it because of moves like bishop to c6. Next move could be bishop a4, for instance, to put pressure on the knight. And after all, it doesn't seem like white can hold on to both pawns. So it decides to give up the e pawn, protect the a5 pawn, because that's a passed pawn. White has some hopes here. The a5 pawn is a passed pawn, protected passed pawn. Queen takes e3, knight to g4, the queen comes back to g5, and now queen e1. Alright, we have taken the pawn, we've got our passed pawn here. Yeah, we both have passed pawns. A passed pawn for Stockfish, E passed pawn for AlphaZero. But how to continue? The bishops are pretty dead. One is blocked by its own pawn and the other is blocked by the white pawn chain. So we gotta do something that's not involving the bishops for now. h5, chasing the knight away from g4 because that's an active piece. You wanna push it back. Go away. Knight to e3 and now h4. That is a very useful move because it's fixing the white pawn chain. Remember when we talked about the capture on e3? Why black wanted to take that rook? good defender. We needed a d5 square for the bishop. And also, after f takes e3, the g3 square is now weak. You see, there used to be a pawn on f2 before the capture on e3. Now, there's no pawn protecting the g3 square. That's a potential vulnerable spot in white's camp. And after h4, we are fixing it. It's not going anywhere. Bishop to e6, and now bishop c6. Finally, this bishop is being activated. Whew. The bishop goes back to c4. Shall we repeat moves and offer a draw? No. Never. d5. That's another tough moment, because yes, I have told you when you push e4, you gotta take care that, hey, this bishop will not have the diagonal. We do have some hopes. If this pawn is pushed, then once again we would have the open diagonal for the c6 bishop. But after d5, we are saying goodbye to that long diagonal. It will never be opened. It's as fixed as it can be. Why to push d5? Well, we have talked about the drawbacks of this move, blocking the diagonal, blocking the mobility of the c6 bishop. But at the same time, it does attack the c4 bishop, winning a tempo, and it defends the passed pawn. So AlphaZero, make sure that we're gonna have that passed pawn for the rest of the game. b5. White decides that it's not gonna move the bishop away, but attacks the black bishop too. Shall we trade? Shall we take on c4 and allow b takes c6? Or shall we move the bishop away? But if we need to move the bishop away, where shall it go? I speak as fast as I can, because this is a critical moment. What would you do in this position? Pause the video for a moment, because you will need to take a breath. The right move, according to AlphaZero, is moving the bishop away. But you cannot move it to active squares like bishop d7 or bishop e8. Well, active. Seems more active than on a8, right? At least. You can't do that because that will drop the d5 pawn. So if you want to keep the bishop on the board, you have to play bishop to b7. Once again, we are behind our own pawn chain. Passive piece. The other bishop is not looking good either. What is AlphaZero doing? Where's the activity that we are so used to? The bishop goes to b3, and now rook b to c8. Can we get some drum rolls, please, for rook b to c8? This is an amazing move. I still don't know why, but it's an amazing move. First choice of the engine, also according to Stockfish. They are very much in line in this position with AlphaZero. Rook b to c8, the first move. That is, according to both engines, this is the best move in the position. Great minds think alike. For humans, I'm not sure that I would have played this move ever. Let's see what happens later. a6, and the bishop has to go to a8. We are back in the corner. Bishop a4, and now bishop to b6. At least we can improve the other bishop, right? It was blocked by the d4 pawn, but we have some hopes that it will make it to a5 one day. King g1 and queen g3, heading toward an endgame. So soon we will actually stop focusing on the position in detail, because this is about attacking like AlphaZero, mainly how to attack the king and how to gain the initiative. But I do want to highlight that yes, after trading queens on g3 and entering the position through the second rank, remember we have an exchange up, so we need to activate the rooks. Knight d to f1, rook e2, knight f5, rook g8. That pawn is dead, but it does not matter because we have the g file for the rook. Now after rook to d2, this knight cannot jump away from g3 because the g2 pawn drops. That's why rook g8 was played earlier. And yeah, we have lost one pawn on the Kingside, but we have high hopes that this c3 pawn will drop. And after it drops, probably the d4 pawn will be gone too, and that would mean the end of the game. Rook f1, bishop a5, attacking the pawn. White decides to trade rooks, which is good usually for the player with the extra rook. Why? Well, the reason is super simple. If you have an extra rook and you trade rooks, it means that you are the only one who still has a rook on the board. That increases the power of your rook. So in general, when you're on exchange up, you will want to trade rooks. And if you're on exchange down, try to keep it on the board, but here it was very difficult for Stockfish already because this rook is extremely active. So whether you trade or not, you will be annoyed by that rook on d2. Rook takes, king takes, and bishop takes c3. h4, rook f8, pinning the knight, king e3, bishop e1, threatening to take. So now black is simplifying the position. I do want you to pay attention to one detail. I told you we will not look at this endgame in much depth, but this bishop, remember the moment when that bishop landed on a8? I'm gonna tell you what move it was. It was back on move 38. On move 38, we played a6, bishop a8. And now, after bishop e1, we are on move 50. Move 50, and the bishop is still on a8. It still has no perspective. But hey, life is good. King e2, there's a trade on g3. And after rook g8, attacking the knight and the pawn behind it, white has to go king f2. Rook g4, we are attacking the pawn as well. Bishop d1 was played. Do you think that AlphaZero took on h4? No. Why would it take a free pawn? It's just hanging, right? You can just take it. No, it does not. It plays e3. Check. You cannot take that pawn because the knight would drop. We all see that. But what happens after king f3? Which pawn would you take? The h4 pawn or the d4 pawn? Which one is more important? Good. It's the d4 pawn, of course, because that will give us another passed pawn, and finally the hope that this bishop will have a diagonal. Finally! Bishop to e2, rook b4, and now, well, rook b4. Before we move on, once again, just let me highlight that the pawn on h4 is still hanging. I'm a huge fan of free stuffs. AlphaZero is not. It does not care at all. It goes rook to b4, and after king takes e3, d4 check, king to d2, gives another check. White cannot go toward the center. King d3 would drop the knight on g3, so it goes to e1 after rook b3, attacking the knight. Knight h5, d3. Now it captures the pawn on b5. Look at the bishop on a8. It is still in the corner. Move 61. Knight f4, rook a5, going for the a6 pawn. Slowly but surely, black is collecting all the pawns. This is Pac-Man mode. Rook takes a6 gonna be the next move, but look at the bishop. Still, it is on a8, still in the corner. Move 63. Well, 25 moves later, we did it. We only had to wait 25 moves to activate the bishop. Why is that such a big deal, and why I'm highlighting this in an endgame when I told you we're gonna be talking about the middle game mainly? I wanted to talk about this in general because in every position, whether it's in the opening stage, middle game, or endgame, if you have a piece that's passive, that cannot be moved, that's basically trapped, that is actually a virtual piece down. So for a long time in this game, it felt like that bishop was not contributing to the game, especially when we had this pawn chain. These pawns are blocking the bishop on a8, and the white pawns are covering the c6 and b7 squares, which means that this bishop cannot be moved. And it didn't look like it would be moved anytime in the future. Now, AlphaZero has seen way more than I did, or than normal human beings would do, because it did not mind that it had to place the bishop on a8. It understood that later, 25 moves later, that bishop will have hope, finally. But it's not easy. It's not easy to know when you can allow that your bishop is so restricted of mobility, and when you shouldn't, when you should trade it before it gets trapped, before it gets way too passive. Because we could have traded that bishop, and then we could have forgotten about all this trouble about whether it will be alive again. But no, AlphaZero kept the bishop and kept the hope that one day that bishop will become someone great. Let's see, very briefly, on move 64, bishop d5. Yes, we did it. And then the bishop goes to f7, because why not? I think a human being would normally go king g7, king f6 and such. You know that in endgames you need to activate the king, but AlphaZero plays bishop to f7. Why not? g4, king g7. I'm gonna go through this stage real quick because this is not an endgame course. I am going to create a special endgame course that's coming out in the summer. So if you know that I have a DVD, a master method, the Anna Rudolf method, I'm continuing my method by launching yet another DVD or virtual download. It doesn't have to be a physical DVD, but that's gonna be about endgames, endgame concepts, and how to play the endgame as best as you can. How to understand endgames basically. So this game may make it to the course, but for now, all you need to understand is that after some 50 moves, lots of patience, back and forth, Stockfish finally resigned on move 97. Patience. Just have patience. Why is it resigning here? If the knight goes back to c5, black could play bishop to e4. This trade doesn't really help because we have a pass pawn, a c pass pawn. So it's an exchange up. It's only a rook versus a bishop, and the c pass pawn will win the game. The rook is very active, the king is very active. There's just no hope to hold this. After bishop e4, another try would be king to g3, but then something like bishop to c6, attacking the bishop, then activating the rook, chasing the knight away to then attack the g4 pawn. And once this pawn falls, the other pawn too will drop, and it's just way too much. White cannot protect it with bishop to c8 because of rook e3 winning the knight. What have we learned from this game apart from the very lengthy endgame which I have not covered? We learned a lot, I hope. I hope you feel like we have learned a lot. We have learned that the refutation of the Italian with the black pieces is a6 on move 4. No, just kidding. I don't think this will ever become popular, this move. Even if AlphaZero won this game, knight to f6 is just such a natural developing move. It's difficult to think that a6 should be a better choice. So stick to knight f6. Don't learn a6 from this game. But what I do want you to learn is that we had this position where after knight f3, black decides to castle kingside, not minding bishop takes h6. And yes, we do need to know patterns. We do need to know that normally you don't want to have such an exposed, vulnerable king. But there are exceptions. And that's what I want you to take as a main conclusion from today's lesson. That dogmatic thinking is not helpful. We should know our basics, basic strategy, patterns. Chess is about pattern recognition after all. But take it as a guideline. Don't take it as a rule. It doesn't mean that every single doubled pass pawn kingside is bad. It looks bad. It feels bad. But sometimes it can be okay if you see the positive side of it too. So every move has its pros and cons, and g takes h6 does have its pros, giving up the g file, opening the g file for the rook for a potential attack on the king side. Make sure that you consider every single position as unique. And when you attack, if you want to create attack, sometimes you need to create weaknesses in your own camp, especially when you castle the same flank. If you want to open files in front of the opponent's king, you may have to push your own pawns, weaken them so that you can get a semi-open file and start attacking the opponent's king on that semi-open file. Another important feature of this game was the knight getting to f4, and that's an attacking tool that you should know. Whether it's with the open g and f files or without, a knight on f4, or with the white piece is a knight on f5, is a monster. It attacks the g2 pawn, which is in front of the king, with castle kingside positions, and at the same time it's very difficult to chase that knight away because the h3 pawn would be in the air. So get your knight to f4 or f5 and you will create a very dangerous situation for your opponent. This piece, this knight, is more valuable than this knight or this knight. So the relative value of the pieces matters. And that's what happened later on. Our third takeaway from this game is that sometimes Sometimes even a piece down is okay if you can manage to weaken the opponent's king to such an extent. No g pawn, the g file is open, the h pawn is about to drop, we have this very strong knight, the rook coming in, the queen coming in, the bishop is also eyeing the king side. Black is a piece down, a piece and a pawn down, but this position is extremely dangerous. I would never want to play this from the white side. This could be your homework if you like. Practice this position. It's a piece down for black, but we have lots of initiative for the piece. And I do want you to understand the strength of the pieces here, the relative value of the pieces, and how powerful black's pieces are in comparison to white's pieces. I hope that you have enjoyed this game. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to the channel because I'm gonna be bringing you more AlphaZero content in the coming weeks and months or years. Who knows? But for now, I can promise a couple of more episodes. All you need to do is subscribe and hit that bell if you wanna be notified about the new videos being uploaded. I'm also continuing with my Twitch streams, so if you wanna join me on my live show, in the description below you will find the link, and I shall see you in the next AlphaZero video. Bye bye!